The 21st century introduced famous architects, one being David Adjaye, who created his work based on the culture of the regional location of the site. Throughout his years of practice, he was inspired to design spaces that speak a different language, allowing the history and cultural relations to evolve the space into something more than just a building. However, it was difficult to represent color in the building, sometimes causing failure in the architecture of the building.
He began whining when he was selected into a competition to design the $500 million National Museum of African American History and Culture, part of the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. He was also on the list of architects who would be eligible to work on Obama's presidential office. The National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. was a monumental building.
His main design inspiration is to have a building that is environmentally friendly. He used his design as a way to express how he saw each building. When discussing Adjaye as a culturally conscious architect, it's important to examine his design of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, part of the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. The National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. is a monumental building. This space offers a calm sensation which creates a space of reflection. It's a tiered upside-down ziggurat. The main space of the building is the three stacked square boxes with outward-leaning walls, resting on glass and steel base. The zigzag silhouette is shrouded in openwork aluminum panels painted dark bronze. These trapezoids had a direct reference to the Yoruba shrine, which was previously done by Adjaye as he was greatly inspired by the work of Nigerian artist Olowe Dise and the motif he created in his sculptures. Calling to attention, Black artisans was important for Adjaye as he wanted to express the varied artistic styles across the Black diaspora, as Brad Grant describes. Adjaye developed a masterful way of abstracting the notion of identity in architecture. This building illustrates how museums can offer a specific narrative alongside a universal message, and the story for this building shows how one culture had empathy for one another. Grant also notes that, whilst often the exterior of his building are of a simple high-tech modernist composition, the interiors are often very regionally and culturally rich and functionally appropriate, which is true when discussing his design of some of his past works. However, due to the museum being both historic and cultural, Adjaye combines his typical high-tech modernist compositions with cultural forms that place emphasis on the unacknowledged metalwork of Black laborers. The structure frequently had been described as a failure and a success as it faced the impossible task of representing Blackness in America, a task that has become more complex in the past few years as the White House has changed from a symbol of progress to one of regression. Accounts of colonialism, prejudice, and abuse sound watered down and in some cases untethered from their perpetrators so that the state of Black America almost feels like an inevitability. The extent to which the museum touches the politics of the present is understandably limited. The museum's proximity to the White House, which was home to a Black president when it opened, which then led to a president who sympathized with white supremacists, somehow dwarfs the stature of the museum and inevitably its architecture. But the structure remains a potent symbol of America confronting its racial divide. Adjaye admits he was nervous about stepping out of line, but says he was convinced it was the right thing to do. This couldn't be just a building that was the background to its content, he said. The mall is a representational space and the African American community has always been in the back room. This was its chance to be on the front lawn. David Adjaye is very socially responsible with his designs, and at the same time, very good at exploring more possibilities for human progress. This allows him to design buildings that are very socially influential. Therefore, his design method starts from the social meaning and the building wants to express, not from space. Like many of Adjaye's designs, this museum conveys metaphors of social issues. However, the design of the National Museum of African American History and Culture does have a space problem. It also has very gorgeous decorations. but the internal space will make people in actual use. It almost feels not perfect. The internal planning of the building was too simple, which resulted in an entire open space with the floors being too high, making the building feel like a temporary exhibition hall rather than a more permanent structure.
Not only does Adjaye incorporate artistic design aspects into his buildings in regards to race, but also regards to the site location of his works. For instance, in his design of the Dirty House, which highlights his reputation as a gritty Brit architect, he focuses a lot on reconstructing and recycling. In this spirit, the building utilizes the industrial fabric of the site, where new art galleries are adjacent to degraded public housing and dilapidated industrial buildings. The material used to cover the exterior of the building was a solvent-based paint with a high volatile organic content, which was hazardous due to the toxic emissions made when the paint dries. He was also inspired by the specific parameters of the physical space to be occupied and the intended functions of the building. Due to his moving around a lot as a child, he was able to develop a heightened degree of cultural sensitivity and exposed him to a variety of architectural styles, which he uses as influences on his approach to design. While advocating for racial equality, Adjaye also wanted to create buildings that began to dissolve the concept of hierarchical differences. While advocating for racial equality, Adjaye also wanted to create a building that began to dissolve the concept of hierarchical differences. It should represent universality and integrity, something of a higher level that would enhance the richness of human life.
As main design inspiration is to have a building which is environmentally friendly, he wants to focus on accessibility, flexibility, and human memory in all his buildings. His style is another inspirational part of his work as an architect. He's also known for his many achievements, such as winning international acclaim for his diverse design of innovative use of materials and light. He was also appointed an officer of the Order of the British Empire in 2007 and was knighted 10 years later for services to architecture, which is a major accomplishment.
To conclude, to showcase the cultural aspects of the identity within his work, Adjaye has created works that reframe the amount of cultural significance we place on buildings. However, with such a strong focus on the artistic symbols of the past, Adjaye doesn't always consider the future implications of the structures he is creating. Although this may be true sometimes, it is always true that the amount of dedication that Adjaye placed on conceptualizing universal themes within his work that memorializes them even when certain aspects of his design seem dated. The structures hold such an importance because Adjaye is great at creating his buildings with a specific context.